بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. I remind you, brothers and sisters, to have a sincere intention in your heart when attending the lesson, seeking reward from Allah Ta'ala. Insha'Allah Ta'ala, in our lesson today, we will be talking about the conditions of a valid purification. When we say purification, we are including both ablution, wudu, and the ghusl, the whole body purificatory bath. For this purification to be valid, there are conditions. And inshallah ta'ala, we will mention. There are 5 conditions, okay, for the purification to be valid, for whether this purification is wudu, ablution, or the whole body purificatory bath, the ghusl. We have already spoken about performing ablution, and we have spoken about performing ghusl. Now, inshallah, we will talk about the conditions for this purification to be valid. We spoke about how to perform them. Now we will talk about the condition for them to be valid. So there are 5 conditions. The first of these conditions is for the person to be Muslim. So the first condition is Islam. This means that purification then is not valid from the non-Muslim. The second condition is at-tamyiz. That means for the person to have reached the age where this person is mumayyiz, meaning the person has the capacity to reason and discern. Okay, so it's a condition that the person who is performing purification has reached at-tamyiz, has reached the age where this person has the capacity to reason and discern. This means the purification of a child who is not mumayyiz yet, or a child who, or a person who is insane, is not valid. Okay, the purification from them is not valid. And anyways, you know that they are not obligated with prayer, neither the child who is not mumayyiz nor the insane person. Okay, they are not obligated with prayer. So we mentioned then now 2 conditions. The first condition we mentioned is Islam. This means the person has to be Muslim for the purification to be valid. The second condition we mentioned is tamyiz. This means the person has reached the capacity to reason and discern for the purification to be valid. The third condition is for there not to be anything that prevents the water from reaching the part that must be washed. Okay, because when the person is making purification, when wudu or the whole body purificatory bath, we are using water to wash. So it's a condition that there is nothing that prevents the water from reaching the part that must be washed. Okay, and we gave an example of that last time. We gave an example of something that puts a barrier and prevents the water from reaching the part to be washed. If you remember, we mentioned an example of that is nail polish. Nail polish puts a layer and prevents the water from reaching the nails. So that has to be removed, and it's better not to apply it in the first place. As to something that conceals the color but does not put a layer, it does not prevent the water from reaching the skin, such as what? Such as, for example, the ink of the pen that we usually use for writing. This ink, for example, if it comes on your hand, for instance, it only puts like a color, but it does not make a layer, so it does not prevent the water from reaching the part that has to be washed. Okay, so then the third condition is the absence of anything which prevents the water from reaching the part that must be washed. This means there should not be anything that prevents the water from reaching the parts that have to be washed. If you remember when we spoke about wudu, what are the parts that we are washing in wudu? The face, the hands, forearms, including the elbows, the feet, including the ankles, and we're wet wiping on the head or part of it. Whereas when we are performing the ghusl, the whole body purificatory bath, everything is to be washed, right? Everything, as we said, head to toe. All right, so we mentioned now 3 conditions. As for the 4th condition for a valid purification, this is for the water to flow on the part that must be washed. For the water to flow, even if it is assisted with rubbing with your hand. This for the parts that have to be washed. And when we're talking about the ghusl, the whole body purificatory bath, that means everything, okay? The whole body, because the whole body has to be washed. I will tell you, inshallah. All right, so when making ghusl, one makes sure that the water flows on the whole body, because the whole body has to be washed. When making wudu, ablution, all the parts where you are washing in ablution, the water has to flow. The exception is when we said wet wipe the head or part of it. Here, wet wiping is sufficient. This is when making ablution wudu. We said the 4th integral of making wudu ablution is to wet wipe the head or part of it. When we say wet wipe, here it's sufficient, for example, for me to put my hand in the water and then I go like that, for example, on my head, okay, I'm wet wiping. This would be sufficient, okay? Whereas the other parts, like the face, like the hands, the feet, the water has to be washed, not wet wiping, but it has to be washed, so water has to flow. When making ghusl, the whole body purificatory bath, water has to flow. So even if the person is using his hand to assist in the flowing, for example, one might perform ghusl by taking the water from a bottle, for example. So let's say I put water from the bottle in my hand and I want to perform ghusl, the whole body purificatory bath with the water, and I'm taking from the bottle. I'm putting it, for example, on my hand, then I pour it on my body, and it is okay to use my hand to assist in the rubbing so that the water flows, okay? As to the 5th condition, before I get to that, I'll answer the sister who asked regarding tamyiz. Tamyiz is not the same as pubescent, dear. Tamyiz, for many children, this happens at approximately 7 lunar years of age, approximately. Some might become mumayyiz before that, some a little bit later. This is when the child has the capacity to reason and discern. You address the child answers, comprehends and answers correctly, for example. As for pubescent, this we spoke about that when we talked about how the person becomes accountable, if you remember, and we mentioned how the person becomes pubescent, okay? I think this was maybe in lesson 1 or 2. Inshallah, one day we can review them again together, all right? But in here we spoke about tamyiz. Here we spoke about the condition, among the conditions is tamyiz, okay? Because dear, the child who is mumayyiz, remember, and has reached 7 lunar years of age, we said it is an obligation upon the guardian of this child to order this child with prayer, even though this child, maybe at age 8, is not pubescent yet. It's not an obligation upon this child who is not pubescent yet, the prayer, yet it is an obligation upon the guardian of this child to order this child who has reached tamyiz and completed 7 lunar years of age to order this child with prayer. This means then this child is performing purification. So purification is then valid from this child who has reached tamyiz, okay, who is mumayyiz. Now, so far we have mentioned 4 conditions for the valid purification. Now we're going to mention, inshallah ta'ala, the 5th condition. I need you here to focus with me because I'm going to mention a few details in this regard. So the fifth condition is to use purifying water. To use purifying water, not stripped of its name as a result of being mixed with a pure substance from which the water can be easily shielded. I'll explain this, inshallah. So the fifth condition is to use purifying water. This is absolute water. Okay, the scholars refer to it as ma mutlaq. It's absolute water. It is water that is called water. Okay, it's not stripped of its name. It is called water. And this is water that is pure and purifying. It is pure in itself and it purifies. All right. So this is absolute water, which is pure itself and is purifying because you want to use it for purification. So it needs to be pure and purifying. This is water that you refer to as water. It is not stripped of its name because of being mixed with a pure substance from which this water could have been easily shielded. So, for example, rainwater is absolute water, which is pure and purifying. Whereas, if let's say you mix another substance, which is pure, a pure substance, you mix it with this water in such a way that this water is no longer called water because it has been mixed with this other pure substance, such as milk, in such a way that it is no longer called water. Rather, when you look at it, somebody asks you, what is this? You say milk, because now it looks like milk. In such a case, even though milk is pure, but this is no longer valid for purification. This is no longer called water, all right? Because this milk could have been easily shielded from it, and it changed it in such a way that it is not called water anymore. It stripped it of its name. It's not called water anymore. Now, when you look at it, you think it's milk, because it was changed by this pure substance, by being mixed with this pure substance from which it could have been easily shielded. All right? So, if the water was mixed with another pure substance from which the water could have been easily shielded from, and this substance that was mixed with the water, it changed the characteristics of the water. It changed its color or its taste or its smell in such a way that it is not called water anymore. This is then not purifying anymore. You do not use it anymore for wudu ablution or for the ghusl, the whole body purificatory bath. Okay? Even though the substance that was mixed with it is pure, but because it stripped it of its name, it changed it in such a way that this substance is no longer called water anymore, and this is something that could have been easily shielded from it. Okay, I gave the example of milk. Milk is pure, okay? If it was mixed with water, for example, you have water in a container, in a bottle, for example, and you mixed milk into it, and now when you look at it, you don't call it water anymore, you call it milk. In this case, then you do not use this for purification anymore. Now, if you noticed, I said several times, if it was mixed with another pure substance from which the water could have been easily shielded from. There are cases when the water might be mixed with a substance from which it cannot be easily shielded from. I'll give an example. For in that case, it remains purifying, okay? For instance, if the water changes because it was mixed with something that is in its natural place. It exists there, something that exists in the natural place of the water, such as weed, or something that is in its pathway, like earth that contains sulfur, okay? Or another similar substance from which this water cannot be easily shielded. It exists there, okay? Such as, for example, in a river, this other substance is in its pathway. It exists there. It's not that you brought it and you mixed it with the water, okay? Rather, it exists, for example, in its pathway. It is something from which the water cannot be easily shielded from. In this case, this water is still purifying. You can still use it for purification, okay? Even if it was changed, for example, by being mixed with this substance, but because this substance is already in, it's hard to shield the water from it, such as, for example, if it is in its pathway, like sulfur, for example. Okay, so we mentioned then that water has to be, for purification, has to be absolute water. That is water that is pure and purifying. Now, the example that we just mentioned is if the water was mixed with a pure substance, all right? Now, what if the water came in contact with a filthy substance, something that is najas, filthy? All right, now I'm talking about another case. If this water came in contact with najas, filth, what then? In this case, the scholars differentiate between what they refer to as small amount of water and as big amount of water, okay? They differentiate between these two, a small amount of water and a big amount of water. They say a small amount of water is water that is less than 2 qullas. I will explain inshallah, okay? So they say a small amount of water is water that is less than 2 qullah, okay? They call this qullah, that is less than 2 qullah. So if this water that we have is less than 2 qullah, this means it is small amount of water. In this case, small amount of water, we said, is less than 2 qullah. 2 qullas, they say, is about 191 liters. About 191 liters. So if the water is 2 qullas or more, it is regarded as a big amount of water, not small. So 2 qullas or more is regarded as a big amount of water, whereas less than 2 qullas is regarded as small amount of water. And what did we say is the amount of 2 qullas in liters? Approximately 191 liters, okay? Now, if this water is small amount of water, meaning less than 2 qullas, by getting in contact with non-exempted najas filth, this small amount of water becomes najas filthy. All right? So if I have a small amount of water, and this small amount of water came in contact with an unexempted najas filth, this small amount of water becomes najas filthy. No longer to be used for purification. It becomes najas filthy. An example of unexempted najas filth is a drop of urine. So if we had, for example, a small amount of water that is less than 2 qillas, and a drop of urine fell into this small amount of water, that's it. You judge this small amount of water that you have as najas filthy, okay? You can no longer use this water for purification. as to if the water is a big amount of water, meaning 2 قلاز or more. Here, the scholars said if it came in contact with najas filth, with unexempted najas filth, we see whether it changed the characteristics of the water, meaning whether it changed the taste, the color, or the smell of this water. If it did not change any of these, and this water was what? Big amount, 2 قلاز or more. If the characteristics of this water did not change because of being mixed with this najas filth material, this water is still purifying, okay? Whereas if it was changed, then you would not use it anymore for purification, okay? So it's important then to understand the distinction between small amount of water and big amount of water. If you have small amount of water, which is less than 2 قلاز, in this case, by this water coming in contact with unexempted najas filth, such as urine, you judge this water right away as being najas filthy. You would not use it for purification anymore. Whereas when you have big amount of water, 2 قلاز or more, in this case, you look whether the characteristics of the water changed, whether it changed in color, smell, or odor. If it changed, then you will not use it anymore. Otherwise, you can still use it. Okay? And Allah Ta'ala knows best.